During a quiet shift, a new waitress freezes. "Ma'am, why is my daughter's father in your wallet photo?" The elegant lady stiffens, guarding a secret that ties them together: wealth, betrayal, and a child's unspoken plea. Before we get into it, let's make this moment global. Leave a comment in your own language. The crystal chandeliers of Azure Restaurant cast dancing shadows across the marble floors as Sarah Mitchell balanced 3 plates on her left arm with practiced precision. 6 months working here, and she still marveled at how a single entree cost more than her weekly rent. But she couldn't afford to think about that now. Table 7 needed their Dover sole, and Mrs. Catherine Brennan didn't tolerate delays. "Your meal, Mrs. Brennan," Sarah said softly, placing the delicate plate before the elegant woman whose designer suit probably cost more than Sarah's car. Catherine barely glanced up from her phone. "The wine?" "Right away, ma'am." Sarah turned toward the bar, her reflection catching in one of the massive mirrors that lined the restaurant. 26 years old, single mother, working 2 jobs. Not exactly the life she'd imagined at 19 when the world seemed full of possibilities, when he seemed full of promises. She pushed the thought away like she'd done 1,000 times before. Emma needed new shoes. That was what mattered now. "Miss?" Catherine's voice cut through her thoughts. "The wine?" "I'm so sorry." Sarah hurried to the bar, got the Chateau Margaux that cost more per glass than she made in a day, and returned to table 7. As she poured, Catherine's phone buzzed. The older woman reached for her Louis Vuitton clutch, and that's when it happened. The clutch tipped over, spilling its contents across the white tablecloth. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." Sarah immediately began gathering the items. Lipstick, keys, a gold pen, and then her hands froze. A wallet. Open, with a photo visible in the clear sleeve. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. The face staring back at her from that photograph was one she'd tried to forget for 7 years. Sharp jawline, those intense dark eyes, that half smile that used to make her heart race. James, the father of her daughter. The man who'd disappeared from her life like smoke. "Is something wrong?" Catherine's voice seemed to come from very far away. Sarah's hands trembled as she handed back the wallet, but she couldn't look away from that photo. He was older now, more refined. The boy she'd loved had become a man she didn't know. "That's an interesting photograph," Sarah heard herself say, her voice barely steady. Catherine's expression shifted, something protective and fierce flickering across her features. "That's my son." She took the wallet back, her fingers lingering on the photo. "James Brennan. Perhaps you've heard of him." The room spun. Brennan. She'd never known his last name. They'd been so young, so reckless. Summer romance between a local girl and a boy who said he was taking a year off before college. He'd never mentioned he was taking a year off from a billion-dollar empire. Sarah's throat felt like sandpaper. "I should get back to work." "Wait." Catherine's hand shot out, gripping Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. Those sharp eyes, James's eyes, studied her face with unnerving intensity. "Do you know my son?" "No," Sarah lied, the word tasting like ash. He looks familiar. Maybe I've seen him in the news?" "Perhaps." But Catherine didn't look convinced. "You're new here?" "6 months. And before that, I worked at a diner in Southie." Sarah gently pulled her wrist free. "Really, Mrs. Brennan, I need to attend to my other tables." She walked away on legs that felt like water, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone in the restaurant must hear it. Behind her, she could feel Catherine's gaze burning into her back. In the staff bathroom, Sarah locked herself in a stall and let out a shaky breath. Emma. How could she explain this to Emma? Her daughter who asked about her daddy every single night. Her daughter who'd been conceived in a summer of passion and born into a winter of secrets. Her phone buzzed. A text from her neighbor. "Emma's asking when you'll be home. She made you a drawing at school today." Sarah looked at the small photo she kept in her own wallet. Emma's first-grade picture. Those same dark eyes, that same half-smile. Anyone who looked at them both would know. Catherine Brennan would know. "Sarah?" Marco, the head waiter, knocked on the bathroom door. "Mrs. Brennan is asking for you specifically. She wants you to serve her for the rest of the evening." Of course she did. Sarah straightened her apron, checked her reflection, and made a decision. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd raised Emma alone, worked herself to exhaustion, and never asked James or his billionaire family for a single penny. She had nothing to be ashamed of. But as she walked back onto the floor and met Catherine Brennan's penetrating gaze, Sarah knew her carefully constructed life was about to shatter. The question was, would the truth destroy her, or finally set her free? The remainder of Catherine Brennan's dinner passed in excruciating slow motion. Sarah felt those eagle eyes tracking her every movement, analyzing every gesture. She'd served countless demanding customers at Azure, but none had ever studied her quite like this. "Tell me," Catherine said as Sarah refilled her water glass, "do you have family in Boston?" The question seemed casual, but Sarah heard the steel underneath. "Yes, ma'am. Born and raised in Southie." "Children?" Sarah's hand trembled slightly. The water glass clinked against the table. Yes, a daughter." "How lovely." Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How old?" "6. The word came out as barely a whisper. The silence that followed felt heavy with calculation. Catherine took a deliberate sip of her wine, and Sarah could practically see the math happening behind those sharp eyes. 6 years old. James had spent that summer in Boston 7 years ago, the year before he took over as CEO of Brennan Industries. "I'd like the check," Catherine said finally. "And your full name, please." Sarah Mitchell." "Mitchell." Catherine repeated it slowly, as if testing it for authenticity. "Thank you for your excellent service this evening, Sarah Mitchell." She left a $100 tip on a $60 meal, and Sarah watched her glide out of the restaurant like a queen leaving her court. The moment the door closed, Sarah's knees nearly buckled. "Damn, girl," Marco whispered, appearing at her elbow. "What did you do to impress the Ice Queen? She never tips more than 20%. Sarah couldn't answer. She was too busy fighting the panic rising in her chest. That night, after her shift, Sarah sat in her beat-up Honda in the parking lot and stared at her phone. She'd resisted for 7 years, but now she typed his name into the search bar. James Brennan. The results flooded her screen. Forbes 30 under 30. Boston's most eligible bachelor. CEO of Brennan Industries. The tech conglomerate that had revolutionized artificial intelligence. Net worth estimated at $2.3 billion. Her finger hovered over an image. James at some charity gala. Impossibly handsome in a tuxedo, a stunning blonde on his arm. The caption read, "James Brennan and fiancée Victoria Ashford." Fiancée. Sarah felt sick. All these years she'd wondered what happened to him. That last day at the beach he'd kissed her goodbye and said, "I'll call you tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. His phone had been disconnected, his apartment empty. He'd vanished like he'd never existed. She'd been 19, pregnant, and utterly alone. "Mommy," Emma's voice pulled her back to the present. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was walking Emma to the car, the little girl's backpack bouncing with each skip. Sarah quickly locked her phone and got out. "Hey baby, how was school?" "I made you a picture." Emma thrust a crayon drawing into her hands. "It's you and me and my daddy." The drawing showed 3 stick figures holding hands. Sarah's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Mrs. Chen says maybe Daddy will come home someday." Emma's dark eyes, James's eyes, looked up at her with heartbreaking hope. "Do you think he will?" Sarah knelt down, brushing Emma's dark curls from her face. "I think your daddy would love you very much if he knew you. Why doesn't he know me? How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her father was a lie? That the boy you loved was actually an heir to a $1 billion fortune who'd been slumming for the summer? That he'd left before you could tell him you were pregnant, and by the time you found out he'd vanished without a trace? It's complicated, baby." That's what you always say. The drive home to their tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Southie took 20 minutes. Emma chattered about her day, playground politics, a science project on butterflies, how Tommy Fitzgerald pulled Jenny Murphy's hair, normal 6-year-old concerns, blissfully unaware that their world might be about to implode. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Miss Mitchell?" Catherine Brennan's voice was crisp, businesslike. "I'd like to meet with you tomorrow. 10 a.m. My office. I'll text you the address." "Mrs. Brennan, This isn't a request. Good evening. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, her heart pounding. She should refuse. She should grab Emma and disappear the way James had. But rent was due in a week. Emma needed those new shoes, and Azure Restaurant was the best-paying job she'd ever had. Besides, maybe it was time for the truth to come out. The next morning, Sarah stood before the gleaming glass tower that housed Brennan Industries, 47 floors of steel and ambition piercing the Boston sky. She'd dressed in her only good outfit, a simple black dress and modest heels, and tried to look like she belonged in a place where the lobby floor cost more than most homes. The receptionist directed her to the 45th floor. Executive suites. The elevator ride felt like ascending to judgment. Catherine's office was all windows and power. Behind a desk that probably cost more than Sarah's car, the older woman sat like a general planning war. "Sit," Catherine commanded. Sarah sat. "I had my people look into you last night." Catherine opened a folder on her desk. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, 26 years old, born in South Boston to Michael and Patricia Mitchell, both deceased, raised by your grandmother until she passed 3 years ago. One daughter, Emma Rose Mitchell, age 6. Father listed as unknown on the birth certificate. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. "What do you want?" "I want to know why my son's face is the same as your daughter's." The words hung in the air like an accusation. "I don't know what you don't." Catherine's voice cracked like a whip. "I've spent 33 years knowing every line of my son's face. I see him in that child's school photo." She turned her computer monitor around. Sarah's stomach dropped. On the screen was Emma's first-grade picture, the one the school had posted on their public website. "So let me ask you again," Catherine said, her voice deadly quiet. "Why does Emma Rose Mitchell have my son's eyes, his chin, his smile?" Sarah lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of dignity she possessed. "Because James is her father." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. Catherine's expression didn't change. "Tell me everything." Sarah took a breath and began. 7 years ago, I was 19, working as a waitress at Kelly's Diner. James came in one day, said he was staying in Southie for the summer, taking a break from life before starting some job. He didn't tell me about any of this. She gestured at the opulent office. He said his name was James, just James. Catherine's face remained impassive. We started dating. He'd pick me up after my shifts. We'd walk the beach, talk for hours. He said he wanted to do something meaningful with his life, that he was tired of expectations. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. He made me feel like I mattered, like we had a future. And then he left. August 15th. Said he'd call me the next day, never did. His phone was disconnected. The apartment he'd rented was empty. I went back every day for a week. Nothing. He just disappeared. Why didn't you try to find him? Sarah laughed bitterly. With what? I was 19 with no money and only a first name. I didn't know about Brennan Industries or any of this. By the time I found out I was pregnant, I'd given up searching. Catherine studied her for a long moment. Why didn't you list him as the father on the birth certificate? Because James, no last name, probably lying about everything, wouldn't have helped anyone. You could have come forward when you knew who he was, demanded support, money. I didn't want his money. Sarah's voice hardened. I wanted him to want us, and clearly, he didn't. My son doesn't know you exist. The words were like a physical blow. Of course he didn't. He'd ghosted her like she was nothing, like Emma was nothing. Well, Sarah said, standing up. Now you know. So what happens next? You're going to pay me off? Threaten me? Because I've raised Emma perfectly fine without the Brennan fortune, and I'll keep doing it. Sit down, Miss Mitchell. No. Sarah grabbed her purse. You wanted the truth. You got it. Truth. Emma is James's daughter, and I've never asked him for anything because he made it clear he didn't want to be found. So unless you're planning to sue me for existing, I'm leaving. I want a DNA test. Sarah froze. What? If Emma is truly my granddaughter, I want proof. Catherine's expression softened almost imperceptibly. And if she is, then we need to discuss how to handle this situation. There's nothing to discuss. Emma is my daughter. She has my name. James gave up any right to her when he vanished. He didn't know she existed. He didn't stick around long enough to find out. The words echoed in the vast office. Catherine's eyes narrowed. My son, she said carefully, spent that summer in Boston against my wishes. I wanted him to take his position at the company immediately after graduation. Instead, he insisted on this sabbatical. He came back changed, quieter. For months, he'd stare out windows like he'd lost something precious. Sarah's heart twisted painfully. Don't, she told herself. Don't let this woman make you hope. When he finally took over as CEO, he threw himself into work like a man running from ghosts. He never spoke about that summer again. Catherine's voice dropped. I always wondered what happened in Boston. He happened to me, Sarah whispered. And then he unhappened. Victoria Ashford happened. Sarah looked up sharply. The blonde you saw in the photos. They've been engaged for 3 years, a merger of families, fortunes, everything I'd planned for him. Catherine's lips thinned. Everything he'd been groomed for since birth. Then why does it matter if Emma is his daughter? He's got his perfect fiancée and his perfect life. Because, Catherine said, and for the first time, Sarah heard emotion crack through the ice. I've always wanted a grandchild. And if that little girl with my son's eyes is mine, then everything is about to change. She's not yours, Sarah said fiercely. She's mine. I've been both mother and father to her for 6 years. You don't get to swoop in with your money and your power and claim her. I'm not trying to take her from you. Catherine opened her desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. I'm offering you a deal. I don't want your money. You will. Catherine wrote out a check and slid it across the desk. Sarah looked down. $50,000. That's for the DNA test and your silence until we determine the results. If Emma is James's daughter, we'll discuss a formal arrangement. Child support, education funds, whatever you need. What I need, Sarah said, her voice shaking, is for Emma to have a father who wants her. Can you write a check for that? The question hung between them. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the DNA test, Catherine said finally. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare yourself for what's coming. And what's that? The truth, Miss Mitchell. It has a way of destroying carefully built lives. Sarah left the check on the desk and walked out. But as the elevator descended 45 floors, she couldn't stop thinking about what Catherine had said. James had come back changed. He'd stared out windows like he'd lost something precious. Had he missed her? Or had she just been a summer distraction that he'd successfully forgotten? 3 days later, Sarah was halfway through her shift at Azure when Marco appeared at her elbow, his face pale. Sarah, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. Who? Marco swallowed hard. James Brennan. The tray Sarah was holding crashed to the floor. Across the restaurant, standing in the entrance with his mother beside him, was the man who'd given her everything and taken it all away. And from the shock on his face as he stared at her, James Brennan had absolutely no idea who she was. The truth wasn't just going to destroy their carefully built lives, it was going to detonate them. The sound of shattering porcelain seemed to echo forever in the suddenly silent restaurant. Sarah stood frozen, her hands still outstretched where the tray had been, her eyes locked on the man in the doorway. James Brennan was even more devastating in person than in photographs. The boy she'd loved had been handsome in an unfinished way, all potential and promise. This man was refined, powerful, every inch the billionaire CEO. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his presence commanding. But those eyes, those same dark eyes that looked back at her from Emma's face every single day, were completely blank. He didn't recognize her. 7 years. 7 years of raising his daughter alone, of working herself to exhaustion, of answering Emma's questions about her daddy. And he looked at her like she was a stranger. Sarah? Marco whispered urgently. Are you okay? Catherine Brennan's expression was unreadable as she watched the scene unfold. She'd done this deliberately, Sarah realized. Brought him here without warning. A test. Or maybe just cruelty. James stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern that felt like a knife to Sarah's heart. Are you all right? Did you cut yourself? His voice. God, his voice was the same. A little deeper, perhaps, but still with that slight Boston accent he'd tried to hide 7 years ago, when he was pretending to be someone ordinary. "I'm fine," Sarah managed, dropping to her knees to gather the broken pieces. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the shards. "Let me help." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. James froze mid-reach, surprise flickering across his face. Marco was already there with a broom and dustpan. "I've got this, Sarah. Why don't you take your break?" "No." Sarah forced herself to stand, to meet James's eyes even though it felt like staring into the sun. "I'm working, Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Brennan, welcome to Azure. Your usual table is available." She walked past them on trembling legs, her professional mask firmly in place even as her world crumbled. Behind her, she heard Catherine say, "This way, James. I believe table 7 has the best view." Of course, Catherine wanted to watch this train wreck up close. Sarah escaped to the kitchen, pressed her back against the cool steel of the walk-in refrigerator and tried to remember how to breathe. This couldn't be happening. James was supposed to be in his glass tower, living his perfect life with his perfect fiancée. He wasn't supposed to be here 10 feet away looking at her like she was nobody. "Sarah?" Marco poked his head in. "Mrs. Brennan requested you specifically to serve them." "No, absolutely not. She said she'd speak to the manager if you refused." Marco's expression was apologetic. "I'm sorry. I know something's going on, but it's fine." Sarah straightened her apron, checked her reflection in the steel surface. Her face was pale but composed. She could do this. She'd survived childbirth alone, survived her grandmother's death, survived 6 years of single motherhood. She could survive one dinner service. She grabbed her order pad and walked back out onto the floor. James and Catherine were seated at table 7, heads bent together in conversation. As Sarah approached, James looked up, and this time she saw it. A flicker of something in his eyes. Not recognition exactly, more like déjà vu. The sense that he should know her from somewhere. "Good evening," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Can I start you with drinks?" "Scotch, neat," James said, then studying her face. "Have we met before?" Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. "I don't think so, sir. You must have one of those familiar faces." "James has always been terrible with faces," Catherine interjected smoothly. "He once walked past his own vice president in the lobby and didn't recognize him." "That was one time, Mother." James's eyes never left Sarah's face. "But I'm usually good with." "I'm sorry. What's your name?" "Sarah." "Sarah." He repeated it slowly, and she saw the wheels turning behind those dark eyes. "Just Sarah." "Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell." Nothing. No flash of recognition, no sudden understanding. He'd forgotten her completely. "Well, Miss Mitchell," Catherine said, "I'll have my usual Pinot Grigio. And perhaps you could tell us about tonight's specials?" Sarah recited the menu on autopilot, watching James watch her. He was trying to place her, she could tell. But the Sarah he'd known had been a 19-year-old girl in cut-off shorts and sundresses, with sun-streaked hair and dreams that fit in the palm of his hand. This Sarah was older, harder, a woman forged by necessity and disappointment. "The duck confit sounds excellent," James said finally, still studying her. "But I have to ask, are you sure we haven't met? Maybe 7, 8 years ago?" Catherine's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. "I would remember meeting a billionaire CEO," Sarah said, and there was more edge in her voice than she intended. "We don't exactly travel in the same circles." "Of course." James sat back, but he looked troubled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You made me a mother," Sarah thought bitterly. "You made me love you, and then you disappeared and you don't even remember my face." She took their orders and fled. The next hour was torture. Sarah had to walk past their table a dozen times, refilling water glasses, bringing bread, delivering their meals. Each time, she felt James's eyes on her, questioning, trying to solve a puzzle he didn't even know existed. Catherine, meanwhile, watched them both like a scientist observing an experiment. "Tell me, Sarah," Catherine said as Sarah cleared their appetizer plates. "Do you have any family in Boston?" James looked up sharply. "Mother, that's inappropriate. I'm simply making conversation." "No, you're interrogating our waitress." He turned to Sarah with an apologetic smile that made her chest ache. I'm sorry. My mother sometimes forgets that not everyone wants to discuss their personal life. It's fine, Sarah said. I have a daughter. She's 6. She watched James's face carefully as she said it, but there was no reaction, just polite interest. How lovely, Catherine said. The same age as Mother. James's voice was sharp now. That's enough. An awkward silence fell. Sarah excused herself and practically ran back to the kitchen. Girl, you look like you're about to pass out, Marco said, grabbing her arm. What is going on with you and the Brennans? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. Sarah pressed her hands to her face. Marco, I need to tell you something. She pulled him into the back office and told him everything. The summer 7 years ago, Emma, the DNA test Catherine wanted, James's complete lack of recognition. Marco listened with growing horror and fascination. Holy shit, he breathed when she finished. Holy actual shit. That man out there is Emma's father? Biologically, yes. In every way that matters? No. He doesn't even remember me. Maybe he's just had a lot of summers with a lot of girls. The words stung, even though Marco hadn't meant them to. Maybe. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Finish my shift. Go home to my daughter, keep living my life. Sarah, he's a billionaire. If Emma is really his kid, she is, then she's entitled to support, education. Hell, she's probably an heir to a fortune. I don't care about his money, but Emma might, someday. Marco squeezed her shoulder. Look, I'm not saying you have to do anything right now, but that little girl deserves to know her father, and he deserves to know he has a daughter, even if he is a dick who forgot your face. Sarah knew he was right, but the thought of telling James, of seeing the shock and possibly the rejection in his eyes, was almost unbearable. She returned to the floor to find James alone at the table. Catherine had apparently excused herself to the restroom. Miss Mitchell, James said as she approached. Could I ask you something? Sarah's pulse raced. Of course. Did you used to work at a diner, maybe 7, 8 years ago? Her breath caught. Why do you ask? I spent a summer in Boston once. Southie, actually. There was this diner, Kelly's, and... He trailed off, his expression troubled. There was a waitress there. She had your smile, your eyes. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. That was a long time ago. It was. James leaned forward, and she saw genuine confusion in his face. But if that was you, why didn't you say something when you saw me earlier? Maybe because you walked past me like I was invisible, Sarah said quietly. Maybe because 7 years ago you disappeared without a word, and I learned that some people aren't meant to be remembered. The color drained from James's face. Wait, Sarah. Your table 7's bill, Sarah said, placing the leather folio on the table. Have a wonderful evening, Mr. Brennan. She walked away before he could respond, before the tears that were burning behind her eyes could fall. But she made it only 3 steps before his hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. Don't. His voice was raw. Please don't walk away, Sarah. God, it is you. From that summer, how did I not... Let go of me. Sarah tried to pull free, but he held on. I looked for you. After that summer, I came back to Boston, went to Kelly's, but you weren't there anymore. They said you'd quit without notice. I thought... You thought what? That I'd be waiting around for you to come back? Sarah's voice was shaking now. You left. No call. No explanation. Your phone was disconnected. Your apartment empty. You vanished, James. So excuse me if I'm not thrilled about your sudden realization. I can explain. Sarah? Catherine's voice cut through the tension. She'd returned from the restroom and was taking in the scene with sharp eyes. Is my son bothering you? We need to talk, James said, looking between them. The 3 of us. Not here, Catherine said firmly. James, release the young woman. We're causing a scene. James looked around and seemed to realize that half the restaurant was watching them. He let go of Sarah's wrist immediately. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Sarah, please. Give me 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes to explain. Explain what? How you forgot about me? How you moved on with your perfect life and your perfect fiancé? Sarah's voice cracked. There's nothing to explain, Mr. Brennan. You were a summer fling. I should have known better than to think I was anything more. That's not... Your bill is on the table. Have a good evening. This time when she walked away, he didn't follow. Sarah made it through the rest of her shift on autopilot. The moment her replacement arrived, she grabbed her purse and bolted for the parking lot. But James was waiting by her car. I told you I needed 10 minutes, he said quietly. Please, Sarah. I owe you an explanation. You owe me 7 years. Sarah shot back. But apparently your memory is too selective for that. I didn't forget you. James ran a hand through his hair, and she saw genuine anguish in his face. God, Sarah, I've thought about that summer every day for 7 years. I thought about you. But when I came back to find you, you were gone. And I had to. There were obligations, responsibilities. My mother needed me to take over the company and I wasn't important enough to keep looking for. That's not true. Then why didn't you recognize me in there? Sarah gestured toward the restaurant. Why did you look at me like I was nobody? James's face crumpled. Because you looked different, older, more guarded. And maybe because I'd convinced myself that summer was a dream, that someone like you couldn't have been real. He stepped closer. But the moment you said your name, the moment you looked at me with that fire in your eyes, I knew. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you immediately. I'm sorry for everything. Sarah wanted to stay angry. She wanted to tell him to go back to his tower and his fiancée and his perfect life. But there was something in his voice, in his eyes, that made her pause. Why did you leave? She asked quietly. That morning. What happened? My father had a heart attack. Mother called me at 6 a.m., told me to come home immediately. I was going to call you from the hospital, but everything happened so fast. By the time I could breathe again, he was gone, and I was CEO, and there were 1,000 things demanding my attention. James's voice was heavy with regret. I tried to find you. I went to Kelly's, asked around Southie. No one knew where you'd gone. My grandmother got sick. I moved in with her, started working at a grocery store to pay for her medications. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. I tried to find you too, but James, no last name doesn't get you very far. They stood in the parking lot, 7 years and a lifetime of hurt between them. Mother told me about the DNA test, James said finally, about your daughter. Sarah's blood went cold. She had no right. Is it true? James's eyes were intense. Is Emma mine? The question hung in the cool Boston air. Sarah thought about lying, about protecting Emma from this man who'd already proven he could disappear. But when she looked at James, really looked at him, she saw the same fear and hope she'd felt the day she'd taken that pregnancy test. Yes, she whispered. Emma is your daughter. James staggered backward like she'd punched him. His hand went to his chest, his breath coming fast and shallow. I have a daughter? You have a daughter. Sarah's voice was steady now. She's 6 years old. She has your eyes, your smile, your stubborn chin. She asks about you every night before bed. And until 3 days ago, I had no idea how to answer her because I didn't even know your last name. 6 years. James's voice was broken. I've missed 6 years of her life. Yes? Because I didn't recognize you in a restaurant. He laughed, a harsh, painful sound. Jesus, what kind of father? You're not her father, Sarah said firmly. A father is someone who shows up, who changes diapers and reads bedtime stories and holds their kid when she has nightmares. You're her biological parent, nothing more. The words were cruel but necessary. James needed to understand what he'd missed, what he could never get back. I want to meet her, he said suddenly. Please, Sarah, let me meet my daughter. Absolutely not. Sarah, no. She pulled her keys from her purse. You don't get to waltz back into my life after 7 years and demand access to my child. Emma is happy, stable, loved. I won't disrupt her life because you suddenly developed a conscience. I'm her father. Biologically. Sarah's voice rose. But you're also a stranger engaged to another woman. How exactly do you think this works, James? Are you going to introduce Emma to your fiancé? Explain to her that Daddy has a whole other family? James paled. Victoria. God, I'd forgotten about... Well, that's convenient. Do you make a habit of forgetting the women in your life? The blow hit home. James flinched. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Sarah was shaking now, 7 years of anger and pain pouring out. You want to know what's not fair? Giving birth alone because the father of your baby disappeared? Working 3 jobs to afford diapers? Explaining to a 5-year-old why she doesn't have a daddy when all her friends do? That's not fair, James. You showing up and acting like the victim is just insulting. You're right. James's voice was quiet. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. The apology deflated her rage. Sarah sagged against her car, suddenly exhausted. I don't know what you want from me, she said tiredly. But whatever it is, I can't give it tonight. I need to go home to my daughter. Our daughter. My daughter, Sarah corrected, at least until the DNA test proves otherwise. I don't need a DNA test, I believe you. Sarah looked at him in surprise. Your mother will insist. I don't care what my mother insists. James stepped closer and Sarah saw determination in his eyes. Sarah, I messed up 7 years ago, I can't change that. But I can be here now. Let me be a father to Emma. Let you what? Write a check? Set up a trust fund? Sarah shook her head. She doesn't need your money, James. She needs stability. Love. Things money can't buy. Then let me give her those things. You're engaged to someone else. The words exploded between them. James went very still. The engagement, he said slowly, was arranged by my mother. A merger of families, fortunes. Victoria and I, we're companions, not lovers. We haven't. He stopped, seeming to realize he was sharing too much. It's complicated. Uncomplicated, Sarah said flatly. Because I won't let Emma become attached to someone who's going to choose a business arrangement over his own daughter. That's not. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. Emma has a fever. When will you be home? I have to go, Sarah said, pulling open her car door. My daughter needs me. Let me come with you. What? Emma's sick. Let me help, please. James's expression was desperate. You said I'm not her father because I haven't been there. Let me start being there. Right now. Sarah wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to protect Emma from this man who'd already hurt them once. But there was something in James's eyes. Genuine concern, fear, the look of a parent worried about their child. Fine, she said finally. But you follow me in your car. And if Emma is scared or uncomfortable, you leave immediately. Understood? Understood. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to Sarah's modest apartment building in Southie. The contrast to James's world couldn't have been starker. Cracked pavement, graffiti on the walls, the smell of garbage from the dumpster behind Building 3. James didn't comment. He just followed Sarah up 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3C. Mrs. Chen opened the door at Sarah's knock, Emma in her arms. The little girl's face was flushed with fever, her dark curls plastered to her forehead. Mommy, Emma reached for Sarah, and then her eyes landed on James. Who's that? Sarah looked at James, at Emma, at the moment that would change all of their lives forever. Emma, she said softly, this is James. He's an old friend of Mommy's. James stared at his daughter, their daughter, and Sarah watched as understanding crashed over him like a wave. Emma had his eyes, his chin, his smile. There was no denying the connection. No DNA test could make it more obvious. Hi, Emma, James said, and his voice cracked on her name. I'm very pleased to meet you. Emma studied him with a seriousness that was heartbreaking in its maturity. Are you my daddy? The world stopped spinning. Sarah looked at James, whose face had gone white. She looked at Emma, whose fevered eyes held nothing but innocent hope. She looked at Mrs. Chen, whose expression said she'd figured out exactly what was happening. Emma, baby, you're sick, Sarah said, taking her daughter from Mrs. Chen. Let's get you inside and we can talk about everything tomorrow. But is he my daddy? Emma insisted, her small hand reaching toward James. He has my eyes. James made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Yes, sweetheart, I have your eyes. And that, Sarah realized as she watched James Brennan, billionaire CEO, Boston's most eligible bachelor, the man who'd broken her heart, stare at his daughter with wonder and terror and love. was when everything truly began to fall apart. Or maybe, just maybe, it was when everything began to fall into place. Emma fell asleep within minutes of taking children's Tylenol, her small body curled against Sarah's side on the worn couch. James sat across from them in the apartment's only armchair, looking completely out of place among the second-hand furniture and discount store decorations. But his eyes never left Emma's face. "She has my mother's nose," he said quietly. "I didn't see it at first, but there, the way it curves slightly at the tip." Sarah stroked Emma's damp curls. "She has your everything. People stop me on the street to tell me how much she looks like her father. I always had to lie and say he lived far away. I'm so sorry." James's voice was raw. "Sarah, I can't. I don't know how to process this. 6 years. I've missed 6 years. You'll miss more if you don't figure out your situation." Sarah kept her voice low, conscious of Emma sleeping. "What are you going to tell Victoria? Your mother? The press?" James ran his hands through his hair, the first time Sarah had seen him look anything less than perfectly composed. "I don't know. Victoria and I, it's not a real relationship. We're companions, business partners. She knows I don't love her. Does she know you're here right now, sitting in your secret daughter's apartment?" "No." James met her eyes. "No one knows except my mother, and I'd like to keep it that way until we figure out what to do." "We?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "There is no we, James. There's me and Emma, the family we've been for 6 years. You're a complication we don't need. I'm her father. You're a stranger with shared DNA." Sarah shifted carefully, trying not to wake Emma. "Look, I understand you're processing, but Emma's well-being comes first. Always. And right now, her life is stable. She has school, friends, routine. I won't let you disrupt that because you're having an identity crisis. That's not what this is." "Isn't it?" Sarah challenged. 24 hours ago, you didn't even remember my face. Now you want to play daddy? Children aren't projects you can fit into your schedule between board meetings." James flinched. "I know that." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're a billionaire CEO engaged to someone else who just discovered he has a secret child. That's a PR nightmare, not a family reunion." "She's not a PR problem, she's my daughter." "Then prove it." Sarah's eyes blazed. "Break off your engagement. Tell your mother you're choosing Emma over her business arrangements. Show up every day, not just when it's convenient. Because that's what being a father means." The challenge hung in the air between them. James opened his mouth to respond, but Emma stirred, her fever-bright eyes opening. "Mommy? My head hurts." "I know, baby." Sarah pressed a kiss to her forehead. "The medicine will kick in soon." Emma's gaze drifted to James. "Is he still here? The man with my eyes?" "I'm still here, sweetheart," James said softly, moving to kneel beside the couch. "How are you feeling?" "Hot, and my throat is scratchy." Emma studied him with that unnerving directness that 6-year-olds possess. "Are you really my daddy?" Sarah's breath caught. James looked at her, silently asking permission. After a moment, she nodded slightly. "Yes," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm really your daddy." "Where were you?" The question was so simple, so devastating. Sarah watched James struggle for an answer that would make sense to a 6-year-old. "I didn't know about you, Emma. If I had known, I would have been here from the very beginning, I promise. Mommy said you were far away. I was. But I'm here now." James reached out tentatively, and Emma placed her small hand in his much larger one. "And if it's okay with you and your mom, I'd like to get to know you. Would that be all right?" Emma looked at Sarah. "Can he stay, Mommy? Please?" Sarah felt her heart crack. Emma had asked about her father countless times over the years, and Sarah had always deflected, protected, shielded her from the truth. But now the truth was sitting in their living room, and Emma was looking at her with such hope. "He can stay for a little while," Sarah said carefully. "But then he needs to go home and you need to sleep. Will he come back?" "I'll come back," James promised before Sarah could answer. "I'll come back every day if you want me to." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Sarah warned. "I'm not." James's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her chest tight. "I meant what I said, Sarah. I want to be her father. I want to be here. You say that now. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When being a parent interferes with your real life? This is my real life. James's jaw set stubbornly. Emma is my real life. You both are. Don't. Sarah stood abruptly, carefully laying Emma back on the couch. Don't you dare include me in your sudden epiphany. We're not a package deal. I'm Emma's mother, and I'll co-parent with you if you prove yourself reliable. But you and me? That's over. That ended 7 years ago. Sarah, I think you should go now. James looked like he wanted to argue, but Emma was watching with wide, anxious eyes. He nodded slowly. Okay, but I'll be back tomorrow. What time is good? We'll discuss schedules later, once we've established ground rules. Ground rules? You don't just get to walk into our lives without boundaries, James. If you want to be Emma's father, we do this properly. Supervised visits at first, scheduled times, clear expectations. You're treating me like I'm dangerous. You are dangerous. Sarah's voice dropped. You have the power to break her heart. I won't let you do that. James stood, moved to the couch one more time. Emma, I have to go now, but I'll see you soon. Okay? Okay, Daddy. The word came out so naturally, so innocently that both adults froze. Sarah walked James to the door, stepping into the hallway so Emma wouldn't hear. Don't make me regret this. I won't. James reached out, touched her arm gently. Sarah, I know I don't deserve your trust, but I swear to you, I will not hurt that little girl. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, I'm going to be the father she deserves. And Victoria? I'll handle Victoria. When? Soon. That's not good enough. Emma can't be your secret shame. She's not. James stopped, took a breath. You're right. I'll talk to Victoria this week. But Sarah, you need to understand, ending the engagement will have consequences. For the company, for my family. My mother will... Your mother already knows, Sarah interrupted. She's the one who demanded the DNA test, remember? So either she accepts Emma or she doesn't. But I won't have my daughter hidden away like something to be ashamed of. Our daughter, James corrected quietly. And I'm not ashamed. I'm terrified. There's a difference. Sarah softened slightly at the raw honesty in his voice. Welcome to parenthood. Terror is pretty much the baseline emotion. How do you do it? Raise a child alone while working multiple jobs? You just do, because the alternative is unthinkable. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. Look, I should get back to Emma. Call me tomorrow and we'll figure out a schedule. Can I have your number? James pulled out his phone. I realized I never actually got it 7 years ago. We just found each other. Yeah, well, things are different now. Sarah rattled off her number, watched him save it. And James, don't call after 8 p.m., that's Emma's bedtime. Understood. He hesitated. Sarah, thank you. For telling me, for letting me meet her. I didn't have much choice. Your mother kind of forced my hand. Still, you could have refused, run. I wouldn't have blamed you. Sarah laughed bitterly. I thought about it. Packing up Emma and disappearing to some small town where billionaires don't exist. But that would have been running from you, not choosing what's best for Emma. And she deserves to know her father, even if he is a complete mess who forgot the love of his life and abandoned his child without knowing it. The words love of his life hit Sarah like a physical blow. Don't. Don't what? Don't rewrite history. We had a summer fling, that's all. Is that really what you think? James stepped closer, and Sarah's back hit the wall of the narrow hallway. Sarah, that summer changed everything for me. When I came back to Boston to find you, it wasn't closure I was seeking. It was you. And when I couldn't find you, you moved on with Victoria and forgot all about the waitress from Southie. I never forgot. James's voice was intense, his body close enough that Sarah could feel the heat radiating from him. I told myself I had to forget. I had responsibilities, obligations. But every time I drove through Southie, every time I saw a woman with your hair color, or heard someone laugh like you, God, Sarah, you haunted me. Stop. Sarah's voice trembled. You don't get to say these things. You're engaged. You have a whole life that doesn't include me. A life I never wanted. A life my mother built for me while I was too busy mourning what I'd lost to fight back. That's not my problem. Isn't it? James's hand came up to cup her face, and Sarah hated how much she wanted to lean into the touch. You said there's no we. But Sarah, there's Emma. We created a child together. That means we're connected whether you want to admit it or not. Connected isn't the same as together. No, James agreed, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. But maybe it's a start. Sarah pulled away before she could do something stupid like kiss him. Go home, James. Process your feelings, deal with your fiancé, figure out your life. Because I don't have the energy to manage your emotional crisis on top of everything else. I don't expect you to... Good. Then we're clear. Sarah opened her apartment door. I'll text you tomorrow about scheduling. James looked like he wanted to say more, but he nodded and headed for the stairs. Sarah watched him go, this man who'd upended her life twice now and wondered what the hell she'd just set in motion. Inside, Emma was awake again, her fever-bright eyes tracking Sarah as she returned to the couch. Is Daddy coming back? Yes, baby. He'll come back. Good. Emma snuggled against Sarah's side. I always wanted a daddy. And now I have one. Sarah held her daughter close and tried not to think about how easily James Brennan could destroy them both. 3 days later, Sarah's phone rang at 7 a.m. Catherine Brennan's number flashed on the screen. Mrs. Brennan, Sarah answered warily. We need to talk. Today. My office, 10 a.m. I have work. I've already spoken to your manager. You have the morning off. Don't be late. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, dread pooling in her stomach. This couldn't be good. She dropped Emma at school. The fever had broken within a day, as childhood fevers usually did, and drove to the glass tower that housed Brennan Industries. This time, she wasn't intimidated by the marble floors or the executives in their power suits. She was Emma's mother. That gave her armor that money couldn't buy. Catherine was waiting in her office, but she wasn't alone. James sat in one of the leather chairs facing his mother's desk, his expression stormy, and beside him, "This is Victoria Ashford," Catherine said smoothly. "I believe introductions are in order." Victoria was even more stunning in person than in photographs. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a cream Chanel suit. She studied Sarah with cool blue eyes that missed nothing. "So you're the waitress," Victoria said, her tone neutral but not warm. "And you're the fiancé," Sarah replied evenly. "This is awkward." "Indeed." Victoria's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Although apparently I'm the only one who didn't know about this situation until this morning." Sarah's eyes cut to James. "You told her?" "I told her," Catherine interjected. "Since my son seemed determined to handle this with all the finesse of a bull in a china shop. Sit, Miss Mitchell, we have much to discuss." Sarah remained standing. "If this is about money, this is about protecting my family's reputation," Catherine said coldly. "And right now, you and your daughter pose a significant threat to that reputation." "Our daughter," James corrected, his voice hard. "Emma is not a threat. She's a 6-year-old child." "She's also proof of James's indiscretion," Victoria said calmly. "The media would have a field day. Boston's most eligible bachelor has secret love child. Can you imagine the headlines?" "I don't care about the headlines," Sarah said. "I care about Emma's well-being." "As do we all," Catherine agreed. "Which is why I'm proposing a solution that benefits everyone." "Let me guess," Sarah said bitterly. "You pay me off, I sign an NDA, and Emma never publicly acknowledges her father. Don't be crude. I'm offering you $3 million, a trust fund for Emma's education, and a formal co-parenting agreement with reasonable visitation rights for James." Sarah's head spun. $3 million. That was more money than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Emma could go to any college she wanted. They could move to a safe neighborhood, buy a house, never worry about bills again. "No," she said. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Sarah's voice was steady. "Emma's not for sale. She's not a problem to be solved or a scandal to be managed. She's a little girl who deserves to have both her parents in her life without conditions or NDAs. Miss Mitchell, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You want me to hide my daughter's existence so James can maintain his perfect public image? That's not reasonable. That's insulting. Sarah, James said quietly, just listen to what my mother is offering. No, you listen. Sarah turned on him, fury blazing. Is this what you want? To pay me off and see Emma on a schedule that's convenient for your PR team? Because if that's the case, tell me now and we'll go back to how things were. You can be the father who lives far away, and Emma and I will be fine. That's not what I want, James said, standing. Mother, this conversation is over. Sarah, Emma, and I will figure out our arrangement without contracts or bribes. James, don't be foolish. I'm done being what you want me to be. James's voice was steel. You want to know why I spent that summer in Southie? Because I was suffocating, because every decision in my life had been made for me since birth. That summer was the only time I'd ever felt free. And Sarah, his voice softened as he looked at her. Sarah was the only person who ever saw me as just James, not Brennan heir, not future CEO, just me. Catherine's expression was unreadable. Victoria, however, looked almost amused. How romantic, Victoria said dryly. James, darling, I think it's time we had our own conversation. Victoria, It's all right. Victoria stood with graceful ease. Honestly, I've been expecting something like this for years. You've always been in love with a ghost. At least now she has a name and a face. You knew? James looked stunned. I'm not an idiot. You agreed to our engagement with all the enthusiasm of a man facing execution. I assumed there was someone else. I just didn't know about... She gestured vaguely toward Sarah. The child. Emma, Sarah said firmly. Her name is Emma. Emma. Victoria inclined her head. I'm sure she's lovely. And for what it's worth, Miss Mitchell, I harbor no ill will toward you. James and I were never a love match. We were a business arrangement that worked for both our families. Then you'll agree to end the engagement? James asked. I will, on one condition. Victoria's sharp gaze moved between them. The breakup is amicable and public. We'll say we've decided to pursue different paths but remain friends. No scandal, no drama. My reputation stays intact. Done, James said immediately. Not so fast. Catherine's voice cracked like a whip. Victoria, your family invested heavily in Brennan Industries based on this engagement. If you back out now, then we renegotiate the investment terms. Victoria shrugged. Mother and father will be disappointed, but they'll survive. Besides, the Ashford family hasn't stayed wealthy for 3 generations by backing lost causes. And James's heart is clearly a lost cause where I'm concerned. Sarah watched this exchange like a tennis match, barely able to process what was happening. Victoria Ashford, the woman who had everything, was calmly ending her engagement like she was canceling a dinner reservation. You're really okay with this? Sarah asked. Victoria's smile was sharp. My dear, I was already planning my exit strategy. This just accelerated the timeline. She turned to Catherine. I'll have my lawyers draw up the dissolution papers. Give James a few weeks to sort out his personal situation before we make the announcement. That should give your PR team time to craft an appropriate narrative. And the investment? Will continue. Conditional on James actually running the company with the brilliance he's been hiding behind his mother's skirts. Victoria's tone was cutting, but not cruel. You're better than this, James. Stop letting fear of disappointing Catherine prevent you from living your life. With that, Victoria Ashford swept out of the office, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Well, Sarah said finally, she was, not what I expected. Victoria Ashford is many things, Catherine said coldly. But predictable isn't one of them. However, she's right about one thing: you need time to sort the situation before going public. Why? James challenged. So you can find another way to control the narrative? So you can build a relationship with your daughter without the entire world watching? Catherine's expression softened almost imperceptibly. James, I may not approve of how this situation came about, but that child is my granddaughter. I won't see her thrown to the media wolves because you and Miss Mitchell are too proud to be strategic. She has a point, Sarah admitted reluctantly. Emma's starting to understand that you're her father. If suddenly there are cameras and reporters, it could be traumatic. So what do you suggest? James asked his mother. 3 months. You spend 3 months getting to know Emma privately, building a real relationship with her. Then we make a carefully planned announcement. James Brennan discovers he has a daughter from a previous relationship. Both parents are committed to co-parenting. Clean, simple human interest angle instead of scandal. And in the meantime? Sarah asked. In the meantime, you continue your life as normal. James visits on a schedule you both agree to. No public outings yet. No photographs. Just family time. Sarah looked at James. He looked back, and something passed between them. An understanding. A truce. They were in this together now, whether they liked it or not. 3 months, Sarah agreed. But any decisions about Emma get made jointly. No more surprises. Agreed, James said. And no more marriage proposals or business arrangements without consulting me, Sarah added, looking pointedly at Catherine. Noted, Catherine said dryly. Now, if we're all in agreement, I suggest you both leave before I change my mind about being cooperative. In the elevator, Sarah and James stood side by side in silence. When the doors opened to the lobby, Sarah turned to him. So, we're really doing this? Apparently. James's expression was shell-shocked. I just ended my engagement, defied my mother, and committed to co-parenting with a woman who barely tolerates me. Is this real life? Welcome to parenthood, Sarah said, and despite everything, she smiled. Nothing ever goes according to plan. Can I see Emma today? Sarah checked her phone. I have to pick her up from school in 2 hours. You could. You could come with me. If you want. I want. James's whole face lit up. God, Sarah, I really want. And watching him, this powerful, controlled man become almost childlike with excitement at the prospect of a school pickup, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, James Brennan could be the father Emma deserved. She just had to make sure he didn't break both their hearts in the process. An Arab billionaire sneered, "Solve this and I'll give you $155 million. Nobody believed it, but the maid calmly did the impossible. And his jaw dropped in shock. Please like and comment if you're enjoying this incredible love story. Your engagement helps us bring you more amazing romantic tales. The 68th floor of Al Rashid Financial Tower buzzed with the kind of tension that only accompanied billion-dollar disasters. Khalil al-Rashid stood behind his mahogany desk, his dark eyes scanning the panoramic view of Manhattan, as if the city itself could provide answers to the algorithmic nightmare that had been plaguing his company for 3 months. At 34, Khalil had built his empire from inherited oil money into a technological powerhouse that dominated markets across 4 continents. His perfectly tailored Armani suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, couldn't hide the frustration radiating from his 6-foot frame. The stubble on his sharp jawline suggested sleepless nights, though his pride would never let him admit defeat. "Sir, the development team is requesting another meeting," his assistant Marcus announced from the doorway, his voice carefully neutral. Everyone knew better than to push their demanding boss when he was in this mood. "Tell them I don't want excuses, I want solutions," Khalil snapped, his slight accent making the words sound even more dismissive. "We've thrown $50 million at this problem. Our stock price has dropped 12%. And still, no one can crack this algorithm." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Khalil alone with his mounting anger. The quantum encryption protocol his company desperately needed remained unsolved, despite hiring the best minds money could buy. MIT graduates, Stanford PhDs, former NASA engineers, all had failed spectacularly. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched the city that never slept, oblivious to his billion-dollar headache. The irony wasn't lost on him that the man who could buy anything couldn't purchase the one thing he needed most: a solution. The soft sound of a vacuum cleaner humming in the outer office broke through his brooding. Khalil glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, 11:47 p.m. The cleaning crew was making their nightly rounds, invisible workers who maintained the pristine environment where fortunes were made and lost. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting Marcus with more bad news. Instead, A young woman entered, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. She moved with quiet efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the standard gray uniform of the cleaning company. Something about her posture caught his attention. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed oddly out of place. "I'm sorry, Mr. Al-Rashid," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and educated. "I can come back later if you prefer." Khalil studied her for a moment. Most cleaning staff avoided eye contact with executives, but this woman looked directly at him with intelligent brown eyes that held no trace of intimidation. "Interesting." "No, go ahead," he said, turning back to his computer screen where lines of impossible code mocked him. "I'll be here all night anyway." As she began dusting his bookshelf with methodical precision, Khalil found himself stealing glances at her. There was something almost meditative about her movements, as if she found peace in creating order from chaos. Unlike the frazzled energy of his highly paid employees, she radiated a calm competence that was oddly soothing. "You work late hours," he observed, more to distract himself from his problems than out of genuine interest. "Night shift pays better," she replied without looking up. "And it's quieter. Less complicated." Something in her tone suggested she knew about complications. Khalil found himself curious despite himself. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said simply, moving to clean his desk area. Her eyes inadvertently fell on his computer screen, where the impossible algorithm code was displayed in all its maddening complexity. Khalil noticed her pause, her cloth hovering over the surface of his desk. "Problem?" he asked sarcastically. "Don't worry, you won't break anything. Though at this point I'm not sure it could get any worse." Maya's eyes were fixed on the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is quantum encryption," she said quietly, almost to herself. Khalil's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" She seemed to realize she'd spoken aloud and quickly looked away. "Nothing, sir. I should finish and let you work." But Khalil was standing now, his full attention focused on her. "No, what did you just say about quantum encryption?" Maya's cheeks flushed slightly. I recognized some of the mathematical patterns. I used to study computer science." "Used to?" Khalil moved closer, his business instincts suddenly alert. "Before becoming a janitor?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Life doesn't always follow the plan, Mr. Al-Rashid." There was steel in her voice now, and Khalil realized he'd touched a nerve. Good. In his experience, people revealed their true nature when pushed. "This algorithm," he said, gesturing at the screen, "has stumped teams of PhD mathematicians for 3 months. It's cost my company millions." "But you think you recognize it?" Maya's eyes met his directly. "I didn't say I could solve it, I just said I recognized the pattern structure." Khalil felt a familiar thrill, the same sensation he got when sensing weakness in a business negotiation. Here was an opportunity to either expose this woman's pretensions or something else entirely. "Tell you what," he said, his voice taking on the smooth, dangerous tone that preceded his most ruthless business moves. "If you're so confident about patterns, here's a challenge." He pulled out his phone and transferred funds with a few quick taps. "I just put $155 million into an escrow account. Solve this algorithm and it's yours." Maya stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I think you're not being serious." "I'm always serious about money," Khalil replied, his dark eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and challenge. "You have 1 hour. Solve what MIT's finest couldn't, and walk away richer than most small countries. Fail and admit you're just another janitor with delusions of grandeur." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Maya's cleaning cart seemed to mock the absurdity of the situation. A billionaire offering a fortune to a woman who cleaned toilets for minimum wage. "Why would you do this?" Maya asked quietly. Khalil shrugged, though his casual gesture belied the intensity in his eyes. "Call it entertainment. I'm tired of watching expensive experts fail. Maybe it's time to see what happens when someone with nothing to lose takes a shot." Maya looked at the computer screen again, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression. a hardening of resolve that transformed her face completely. When she straightened her shoulders, she no longer looked like a janitor at all. 1 hour? She asked. 1 hour. Maya moved to his chair and sat down with a confidence that made Khalil's pulse quicken. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment, before she began typing with a speed and precision that immediately told him he'd made a terrible mistake, or discovered something extraordinary. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard with the fluid grace of a concert pianist, her previous deference completely abandoned. The transformation was so complete that Khalil wondered if he was witnessing an elaborate con, or something far more intriguing. "The core issue isn't the encryption itself," she murmured, her voice taking on a completely different cadence, analytical, confident, with undertones of excitement. "It's the quantum entanglement verification protocol. Whoever designed this was thinking in classical terms about quantum behavior." Khalil moved behind her chair, watching lines of code appear and disappear faster than he could follow. The scent of her shampoo, something clean and understated, reached him, and he found himself oddly distracted by the graceful curve of her neck as she worked. "You're debugging 3 months of work in real time," he observed, his voice closer to her ear than strictly professional. "I'm not debugging," Maya replied without looking up. "I'm rebuilding. Your team was trying to force a square peg into a round hole. The mathematical foundation was flawed from the beginning." Her confidence was mesmerizing. This wasn't the hesitant janitor from 20 minutes ago. This was someone who spoke the language of advanced mathematics as fluently as she breathed. "Where did you learn to code like this?" Khalil asked, genuinely curious now. Maya's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. "MIT, Computer Science and Applied Mathematics, double major. Graduated summa cum laude." The casual way she dropped this information while completely rewriting his company's most challenging project struck Khalil as either massively arrogant or entirely truthful. Either way, he was fascinated. "MIT," he repeated. "And you're working as a janitor because sometimes brilliant people make catastrophically stupid personal decisions," Maya said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, like trusting the wrong person with everything they've built. There was a story there, and Khalil found himself wanting to hear it. In his experience, the most interesting people were those who'd fallen from great heights and survived. "Betrayal?" he guessed. Maya's typing never slowed, but he caught the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. "Business partner. Also my fiancé." Amazing how efficiently someone can destroy your life when they have access to both your heart and your bank accounts. The bitter edge in her voice was unmistakable. Khalil felt an unexpected surge of anger toward a man he'd never met. "He stole from you?" "He stole everything," Maya said simply. "Company, patents, reputation, investment capital." By the time I realized what was happening, he'd positioned himself as the genius behind our innovations, and me as the pretty face who'd gotten lucky with connections. Khalil studied her profile as she worked. The strong line of her jaw, the focused intensity of her expression, the way she commanded the computer like it was an extension of herself. Nothing about Maya suggested someone who'd gotten anywhere based on looks alone. "Your patents?" he asked. "Blockchain security protocols, 3 of them, now worth about 200 million combined." Maya's laugh held no humor. "Turns out love makes you sign documents without reading them carefully." "Jesus," Khalil breathed. He'd heard of similar cases, brilliant innovators destroyed by trusted partners. But hearing it from someone currently earning minimum wage while casually revolutionizing his company's code created a cognitive dissonance he wasn't prepared for. "Almost finished," Maya announced, her voice returning to its professional tone. "Your quantum verification system needed to account for temporal variance in entangled particles. The algorithm was assuming static behavior in a dynamic environment." Khalil blinked. "I understood maybe half of that." "You don't need to understand it," Maya said with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "You just need it to work." The smile transformed her completely. Suddenly, he could see the confident MIT graduate she'd once been, the brilliant innovator who'd built something worth millions. It also made him acutely aware of how beautiful she was when she wasn't hiding behind the protective shell of someone society preferred to ignore. "There," Maya said, leaning back in his chair. "Run the verification protocol." Khalil moved to look over her shoulder at the screen. The code was elegant in a way that spoke to mathematical beauty rather than mere functionality. Even with his limited programming knowledge, he could see the difference between this and the clunky attempts his team had produced. He executed the verification sequence, hardly daring to breathe. Numbers scrolled across the screen in patterns that had eluded his experts for months. And then, impossibly, incredibly, the system displayed two words that had become the holy grail of his company's efforts: verification successful. "Holy shit," Khalil whispered. Maya stood up from his chair, smoothing down her gray uniform with hands that were perfectly steady. "The escrow account information should arrive in your email within the next few minutes. The transfer will complete automatically once the system passes all verification tests." Khalil stared at her. "You actually did it." "I told you I recognized the pattern structure," Maya said mildly, as if casually earning $155 million was a typical Tuesday night activity. "Maya," Khalil said, and something in his voice made her look at him directly. "This is going to sound insane, but I need to ask, are you really a janitor?" She tilted her head, considering the question. "I really clean offices for 8 hours a night, 5 days a week. I really live in a studio apartment in Queens that costs 60% of my income. I really haven't used my MIT education professionally in 3 years. But you're not really a janitor," Khalil pressed. Maya's smile turned sad. "Mr. Al-Rashid, when you lose everything that defined who you were, you become whatever pays the bills. Tonight I was a janitor who happened to solve your algorithm. Tomorrow I'll go back to being a janitor who's rich enough to quit but probably won't because, honestly, I have no idea what else to do with myself." The vulnerability in her admission hit him unexpectedly. Here was a woman who'd just demonstrated intellectual capabilities that would make her invaluable to any tech company in the world, and she sounded lost. "You could come work for me," Khalil said impulsively. Maya laughed, but not unkindly. "Mr. Al-Rashid, you just handed me enough money to retire. Why would I want to work for someone who settles corporate disputes by throwing around 9-figure challenges?" "Because," Khalil said, moving closer to her, "I suspect you're the kind of person who needs to create things, and I'm the kind of person who makes creation possible." For a moment, something electric passed between them. Maya's eyes widened slightly as if she was seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. Khalil felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fascinating woman standing in his office at midnight, having just turned his world upside down. Then Maya stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should finish my rounds," she said quietly. "Congratulations on solving your algorithm problem, Mr. Al-Rashid." She moved toward her cleaning cart, but Khalil caught her arm gently. "Maya, have dinner with me tomorrow night." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. "You're asking your janitor on a date?" "I'm asking the most brilliant woman I've ever met to dinner," Khalil corrected. "The fact that I met her while she was emptying my trash can is just interesting timing." Maya studied his face for a long moment. "Mr. Al-Rashid, we both know this is a terrible idea." "Probably," Khalil agreed. "But I haven't been this intrigued by anyone in years, and after tonight I suspect you might be worth a few terrible ideas." 24 hours later, Khalil found himself in the unprecedented position of being nervous. The Michelin-starred restaurant he'd chosen for dinner suddenly seemed too formal, too much like the ostentatious displays of wealth that had probably surrounded Maya during her previous life, and that had ultimately betrayed her. He'd changed restaurants 3 times before settling on a quiet Italian place in the village that was expensive enough to show respect, but intimate enough to actually allow conversation. As he waited at their reserved table, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes, he wondered if Maya would even show up. The hostess approached with a woman Khalil almost didn't recognize. Gone was the gray uniform and practical ponytail. Maya wore a simple black dress that was elegant without being flashy, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She moved with the same quiet confidence he'd glimpsed the night before, But now it wasn't hidden beneath the protective anonymity of service work. She was absolutely stunning. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Maya said as she reached the table, and there was amusement in her voice at his obvious surprise. "Maya," he managed, standing to pull out her chair. "You look incredible. You look like someone who wasn't expecting his janitor to clean up well," she replied with a slight smile. Khalil felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I deserved that." As they settled into their seats, Khalil found himself studying her more openly. The woman across from him bore little resemblance to the service worker he'd met last night. Her posture was different, her expressions more animated. It was as if she'd been wearing a costume that she'd finally taken off. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said after they'd ordered wine. "Did you really have $155 million just sitting around to throw at a random challenge?" Khalil laughed, and the sound was more relaxed than he'd felt in months. "Define sitting around. But yes, I could access that amount relatively quickly. Why that specific number?" "It seemed large enough to be meaningful, but not so large as to be impossible," Maya said thoughtfully. "I was trying to calculate how much someone like you might consider worth the risk of looking foolish." "Someone like me," Khalil repeated. "You mean arrogant and reckless?" Maya tilted her head, studying him. "I was thinking more like successful enough to take calculated risks and confident enough to bet against conventional wisdom." Her assessment was surprisingly generous, and Khalil felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "That's a nicer interpretation than I expected. I'm generally not in the business of insulting men who've just made me financially independent," Maya said with dry humor. "Though I have to admit, the way you offered that challenge was impressively dramatic." "Impressively dramatic," Khalil mused. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should. Most people with your kind of money are boring. All calculation, no instinct." Maya took a sip of wine and something in her expression shifted. "Actually, that's not fair. Most people I knew with money were boring, past tense." "Tell me about him," Khalil said quietly. "Your partner." Maya's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her wine glass. "David, what do you want to know?" "Whatever you're willing to share." For a moment, Maya looked like she might deflect the question. Then she seemed to make a decision. "We met in graduate school. Brilliant programmer, charming, came from money but acted like he'd rather be judged on merit than family connections. I thought that meant he had integrity." Her voice remained steady, but Khalil could hear the careful control beneath it. "We started working together on blockchain protocols during our final year. The chemistry was incredible, both intellectual and personal. By graduation, we were engaged and had our first provisional patent." "What changed?" Maya was quiet for so long that Khalil wondered if she would answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I found out he'd been systematically documenting our work sessions, editing the recordings to make it appear like he was leading all the innovation while I was just following along. He'd been building a case that the intellectual property was primarily his for over a year." Jesus. "The patents were filed in both our names, but the supporting documentation told a different story. When our startup began attracting serious investment interest, David used that documentation to convince investors that I was a liability. Brilliant but unstable, prone to taking credit for collaborative work." Khalil felt anger building in his chest. How did he get away with it? Maya's laugh was bitter. "He was very good at his job, and I was very good at trusting him. By the time I realized what was happening, he had investors, board members, and even some of our employees convinced that I was delusional." "Your own employees?" "David was charismatic. He made people feel valued, appreciated. When he started suggesting that I was becoming possessive about work that was clearly collaborative, they wanted to believe him." Maya met Khalil's eyes directly. "It's amazing how quickly people will accept a narrative that absolves them of having to choose sides." Khalil thought about his own employees, his own board members. How easy would it be for someone with the right skills to manipulate perceptions? Probably easier than he wanted to admit. "What happened to the patents?" "Bought out of my stake for significantly less than market value." The board voted. David abstained, of course, to avoid conflict of interest. Maya's tone was conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. I was given 30 days to accept their offer or face a lengthy legal battle with people who had significantly more resources than a suddenly unemployed computer scientist. You could have fought. With what money? David had made sure I looked unstable and potentially litigious. No law firm wanted to take the case on contingency, and I couldn't afford to pay up front. Maya shrugged. Sometimes the house wins, Mr. Al-Rashid. Khalil studied her face, looking for signs of self-pity or bitterness. Instead, he saw something that looked like hard-won acceptance. You started over, he observed. I tried to, but reputation follows you in tech. David had been very thorough in his character assassination. Every job interview felt like an interrogation about my previous difficulties with collaborative work environments. So you became a janitor. I became invisible, Maya corrected. There's a difference. As a janitor, no one expects brilliance. No one wants to hear your ideas. No one asks about your past or your potential. You just exist in the spaces between other people's important lives. The sadness in her voice was almost unbearable. Khalil found himself wanting to find David and make him pay for every slight, every theft, every moment of doubt he'd planted in Maya's mind. But you're not invisible, Khalil said. Not to me. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Al-Rashid. Khalil, he corrected. And I mean it. What I saw last night wasn't just technical skill. It was artistry. The way you approach that problem, the elegance of your solution, that's not something you can fake or steal. Khalil, Maya said carefully, and his name sounded different in her voice, warmer, more personal. I appreciate what you're saying, but have dinner with me again tomorrow night, Khalil interrupted. Maya blinked. We're having dinner right now. Different dinner, different restaurant, same conversation, but deeper. Khalil leaned forward slightly. I want to know more about how your mind works. I want to understand what drives someone to rebuild their entire life from the ground up. And honestly, I want to spend more time with the most interesting person I've met in years. You barely know me. Then let me fix that. Maya stared at him, and Khalil could practically see her brain working through the implications, the risks, the potential complications. Finally, she spoke. This is complicated, Khalil. We come from completely different worlds now. 3 days ago, that might have been true, Khalil said. But yesterday, you made yourself $155 million richer. Which world do you belong to now? Maya considered this. I honestly don't know. Then let's figure it out together. Something shifted in Maya's expression, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. Okay, she said quietly. One more dinner. Good, Khalil said, and his smile was genuinely warm. Because I have a feeling we're just getting started. As if on cue, Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and froze. What is it? Khalil asked. Maya's face had gone pale. David, she said quietly. He wants to meet. The coffee shop David had chosen was deliberately neutral, a chain establishment in Midtown that suggested neither wealth nor poverty, just carefully calculated anonymity. Maya sat across from the man who had once been her entire world, studying the face she'd once kissed goodnight every evening, searching for any trace of the person she'd thought she'd loved. David looked exactly the same. Perfectly groomed brown hair, expensive but understated clothing, the kind of smile that had once made her feel like she was the only person in the room. Now it made her skin crawl. You look well, Maya, David said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of warm concern that had once comforted her during late-night coding sessions. Really well. Cut the bullshit, David. What do you want? His eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Straight to the point. I always admired that about you. Maya felt her jaw clench. You have 30 minutes before I leave. David leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating expression she'd learned to recognize too late. I heard about your recent windfall. $155 million for solving an algorithm. Impressive. The words hit Maya like ice water. How did you hear about that? Maya, you solved a problem that had been stumping Al-Rashid Financial for months. Word travels fast in our circles. Our circles, Maya repeated flatly. I clean offices for minimum wage, David. We don't travel in the same circles anymore. Don't you? David's smile took on a predatory edge. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you found yourself a very wealthy patron. Khalil al-Rashid is quite the catch. Maya's blood turned cold. Have you been watching me? I keep tabs on former business associates, David said smoothly. It's just good practice. And imagine my surprise when I discovered that my brilliant former partner was working as a janitor in the very building where one of my potential investors operates. Potential investors? David's smile widened. Al-Rashid Financial has been evaluating our latest blockchain innovations for a possible partnership. Fascinating coincidence, don't you think? Maya stared at him, her mind racing through the implications. You orchestrated this. I orchestrated what? You getting a job cleaning his office? You solving his algorithm? You having dinner with him last night? David shook his head with false regret. Maya, you always did have a tendency toward paranoid thinking. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Maya felt the familiar doubt creeping in. Then she remembered Khalil's reaction to her solution, the genuine surprise and respect in his eyes. David couldn't have faked that. What do you want? She asked again. David pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. I want you to look at this. The screen showed a contract, dense legal language that Maya's trained eye could parse quickly. It was a non-disclosure and non-compete agreement specifically related to quantum encryption algorithms. This is my signature, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. From our original partnership agreement, David confirmed. Section 15, subsection C. Any innovations related to quantum computing or encryption developed during our professional relationship remain subject to joint intellectual property claims for a period of 5 years post-dissolution. Maya felt the world tilt. I never agreed to that. Your signature suggests otherwise. David's voice remained pleasant, conversational. Of course, at the time, quantum encryption seemed like a distant possibility. We were focused on blockchain protocols. You added this clause after I signed. Prove it. David's smile was razor-sharp now. The document is properly notarized, legally binding, and filed with the appropriate authorities. Any court would uphold it. Maya's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against the table to hide it. Even if this were legitimate, I didn't develop anything for you. I solved Khalil's algorithm independently. Did you? David tilted his head thoughtfully. Because I have documentation suggesting that some of the foundational work you used in that solution was developed during our partnership. Specifically, the temporal variance calculations that made your breakthrough possible. He was right, and they both knew it. The mathematical framework she'd used had been part of theoretical work they'd done together 2 years ago. Work that had seemed purely academic at the time. You can't prove I used that framework. I don't need to prove it, Maya. I just need to suggest it. David leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Think about what happens when Al-Rashid Financial discovers that their brilliant new consultant might be legally obligated to share her innovations with a competitor. Think about how that affects their willingness to work with you. Maya felt sick. Khalil isn't working with me professionally, isn't he? David's eyebrows rose again. Because my sources suggest he offered you a position with his company just yesterday, and the timing of your dinner date certainly suggests a professional relationship with personal benefits. The way he said it made Maya feel dirty. You're disgusting. I'm practical. David's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You cost me 18 months of development time, Maya. 18 months of having to recreate innovations that were rightfully mine. I'm simply recouping my losses. Those innovations were mine. Prove it, David said again, and the repetition was like a slap. In court, with lawyers, while Al-Rashid Financial watches their potential partner become embroiled in a lengthy intellectual property dispute. Maya stared at him, understanding finally dawning. You want money? I want what's fair. 50% of your recent windfall seems reasonable. $77.5 million as compensation for the foundational work that made your solution possible. And if I refuse? David's smile returned, bright and terrible. Then I file an injunction preventing you from using any algorithms that incorporate shared intellectual property. I leak the story to the tech press about the legal dispute surrounding Al-Rashid's quantum encryption solution. And I make sure every potential employer in the industry knows that working with Maya Chen comes with significant legal risks. The threat was comprehensive and devastating. Even if Maya could eventually prove her case in court, the process would destroy any chance she had of rebuilding her career or her relationship with Khalil. "You bastard," she whispered. "I'm a businessman," David corrected. "And unlike you, I learn from our past mistakes. I don't let emotions cloud my judgment anymore." Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. Khalil's name appeared on the screen. "Hope your meeting goes well. Dinner tomorrow still on?" The simple message, with its assumption that she was strong enough to handle whatever David threw at her, almost broke her heart. Khalil had no idea what kind of legal and professional nightmare he was about to inherit by association. "I need time to think," Maya said. "Of course." David stood smoothly, leaving exact change for his coffee on the table. "You have 48 hours to transfer the funds. After that, I file the paperwork and contact the press." He paused at her shoulder, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper again. "Oh, and Maya? You might want to think carefully about what you tell Al-Rashid about this conversation. Men like him don't appreciate complications, especially complicated women who come with legal baggage." David walked away, leaving Maya alone with the contract and the devastating realization that even her escape from his influence had been incomplete. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Khalil. "Actually, why wait? Free for dinner tonight?" Maya stared at the screen, her heart breaking. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, "Something's come up. Rain check?" The response came immediately. "Everything okay?" Maya typed yes and immediately deleted it, then no and deleted that too. Finally, she turned off her phone and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the contract on the table like the poison it was. She had 48 hours to choose between destroying Khalil's trust or destroying her future. Either way, David would win again. Khalil stared at his phone for the 5th time in an hour, willing Maya to respond to his messages. Her sudden coldness after David's meeting felt wrong, not like the confident woman who'd solved his impossible algorithm, or the vulnerable one who'd shared her story over dinner. Something was very wrong. He was still debating whether to respect her space or track her down when Marcus knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's a David Chen here to see you. Says it's about a potential partnership opportunity." Khalil's blood ran cold. Chen, Maya's ex-fiancé, had a different last name, but the timing couldn't be coincidental. "Send him in," Khalil said, his voice carefully neutral. The man who entered his office was everything Maya had described and nothing like what Khalil had expected. Handsome in a clean-cut, unthreatening way, with the kind of practiced charm that set Khalil's business instincts on high alert. "Mr. Al-Rashid," David said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "David Chen, CEO of Chen Innovations. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." Khalil shook the offered hand, noting the expensive watch and manicured nails. "Mr. Chen, I understand you have a business proposition." "I do. But first I feel I should mention that I know Maya quite well. Personal and professional history." The statement was clearly designed to provoke a reaction. Khalil kept his expression neutral. "Ms. Chen is an associate of mine." "Associate," David repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting way to describe someone you're dating." "My personal life isn't relevant to this meeting," Khalil said coolly. "What exactly are you proposing?" David pulled out a tablet and placed it on Khalil's desk. "I'm proposing that you might want to reconsider your association with Maya before it becomes professionally problematic." The screen showed legal documents, contracts, and what appeared to be development logs. Khalil scanned them quickly, his business law background allowing him to parse the essential elements. "This appears to be an intellectual property dispute," Khalil observed. "More than that. It's documentation, proving that the algorithm Maya solved for you incorporates foundational work developed during our partnership, work that remains subject to joint ownership under our original agreement. Khalil studied the documentation more carefully. On the surface, it appeared legitimate, properly notarized, legally formatted with Maya's signature clearly visible. But something felt off. You're claiming ownership of Maya's solution? I'm claiming ownership of the mathematical framework that made her solution possible, David corrected smoothly. The temporal variance calculations, the quantum entanglement protocols, all developed during our joint research period. And you're telling me this because? David's smile widened. Because I assume you don't want your company embroiled in a lengthy intellectual property dispute, especially not over technology that might be legally questionable. Khalil leaned back in his chair, studying David with the cold assessment he reserved for hostile negotiations. What do you want? For you? Nothing. This is purely about Maya and our unresolved business relationship. David's tone remained friendly, but his eyes were calculating. I simply thought you should know what you're getting involved with. How considerate of you. I try to be. David collected his tablet and stood. Of course, if Maya has misrepresented the legal status of her work to you, that could create complications, especially if your company plans to commercialize her algorithm. The threat was subtle but clear. Khalil felt anger building in his chest, not at the legal complications but at the casual way this man was trying to destroy Maya's life again. Mr. Chen, Khalil said, his voice taking on the dangerous edge that made his board members nervous. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, but I should mention that Al-Rashid Financial has excellent legal counsel. If there are intellectual property concerns, I'm confident we can resolve them appropriately. Something flickered in David's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that his intimidation tactics weren't working as expected. Of course, David said smoothly. I just thought you should be aware of the potential complications that come with Maya's involvement in any project. After David left, Khalil sat alone in his office, staring at the legal implications of what he'd just learned. If David's claims were legitimate, Maya's algorithm could indeed be legally problematic. But something about the entire interaction felt wrong. His phone rang. Marcus again. Sir? I have Dr. Elizabeth Warren from MIT on the line. She says it's about Maya Chen and that it's urgent. Khalil took the call immediately. Dr. Warren? Mr. Al-Rashid, I apologize for calling unexpectedly. Maya was one of my brightest students, and I understand she recently solved a significant algorithm for your company. She did. I also understand that her former partner David has contacted you about intellectual property concerns. Khalil's pulse quickened. How did you know that? Because David Chen has spent the last 3 years systematically contacting anyone who showed professional interest in Maya. He uses the same legal documentation, the same intimidation tactics, and the same goal to ensure that Maya remains professionally isolated. The contracts are fake, the contracts are real but incomplete. What David doesn't share is the subsequent documentation that invalidates his claims. Documentation that Maya developed independently after their partnership dissolved, and that clearly establishes her sole ownership of the relevant mathematical frameworks. Doctor. Warren's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades in academic intellectual property disputes. Mr. Al-Rashid, David Chen is a brilliant programmer, but Maya is a once-in-a-generation mathematical innovator. What she created for you is entirely her own work. Why hasn't Maya defended herself? Because David is very good at making the legal battle seem costlier than surrender. And because after 3 years of professional sabotage, Maya started believing that maybe she didn't deserve to win. Khalil felt his anger crystallize into something cold and focused. Doctor, Warren, would you be willing to provide testimony about the legitimate ownership of Maya's work? I'd be delighted to. In fact, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to finally call David's bluff. After ending the call, Khalil immediately contacted his head legal counsel. Within 2 hours, he had a comprehensive strategy for not only defending Maya's intellectual property rights, but exposing David's pattern of fraudulent intimidation. The sun was setting when he finally drove to Maya's Queens apartment building. She answered her door looking exhausted and defeated, wearing old jeans and an oversized sweater that seemed designed to hide her from the world. "Khalil," she said quietly, "you shouldn't be here." "David came to see me today," Khalil said without preamble. Maya's face went pale. "What did he tell you?" "What?" "A very convincing story about shared intellectual property and legal complications." Khalil stepped closer. "A story that would have worked perfectly if I hadn't also spoken to Dr. Warren from MIT. Maya's eyes widened. "Elizabeth called you?" "She called to warn me about David's pattern of sabotaging your career, and to offer testimony that your algorithm is entirely your own work." Maya stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "But the contracts are incomplete. The documentation David uses to intimidate people conveniently omits the subsequent agreements that established your independent ownership of the relevant mathematical frameworks." "I don't understand." Khalil reached for her hands, noting how cold they were despite the warm apartment. "Maya, you've been legally in the right this entire time. David has been committing fraud for 3 years, and no one ever called him on it because his victims couldn't afford to fight back." Maya's legs seemed to give out and she sank onto her couch. "That's not possible." "It's not only possible, it's documented. My legal team spent this afternoon reviewing your original partnership dissolution. David has no legitimate claim to your work. But the companies that wouldn't hire me were scared off by lies." Khalil sat beside her, wanting to pull her into his arms, but sensing she needed space to process. "Maya, David has been systematically destroying your reputation with legal threats he knew he couldn't back up in court." Maya was quiet for so long that Khalil wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years. I've spent 3 years believing I deserved what happened to me. You didn't deserve any of it." Maya looked at him, and Khalil saw something breaking open in her expression, not breaking apart but breaking free. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we destroy him," Khalil said simply. "My legal team is filing charges for fraud, defamation, and intentional interference with business relationships. By tomorrow morning, David Chen's career will be over. And us?" The question hung in the air between them. Khalil reached for her hand again, this time intertwining their fingers. "Us," he said quietly, "is entirely up to you. But Maya, I need you to know something. What I feel for you has nothing to do with algorithms or business or solving problems. It has everything to do with the fact that you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Khalil, I've been so scared. For 3 years I've been scared of hoping for anything better." "You don't have to be scared anymore," Khalil said, moving closer to her on the couch. "I'm not going anywhere." When Maya finally kissed him, it tasted like freedom. 6 months later, Maya stood in the boardroom of Chen Innovations, watching David's former employees pack their belongings into cardboard boxes. The federal investigation had been swift and thorough. Once one victim came forward with proper legal support, dozens of others had emerged from the shadows. "Hard to believe it's really over, Doctor," Warren said, joining Maya at the window that overlooked Manhattan's financial district. "Sometimes I still wake up expecting it to have been a dream," Maya admitted. "Good dreams have been rare the last few years." The older woman smiled. "How are things with your young billionaire?" Maya's cheeks warmed. "Khalil isn't that young, and things are complicated." "Complicated how?" "Last I heard, he'd offered you a position as Chief Innovation Officer with a salary that would make most CEOs weep with envy." "He did," Maya sighed. "And I turned him down." Dr. Warren's eyebrows rose. "Dare I ask why?" "Because I need to know I can succeed on my own before I build a life with someone else. I spent 3 years believing I was broken. I can't jump from that into depending on Khalil's success to define my worth." "And what does Khalil think about this decision?" Maya smiled despite herself. "He said, and I quote, 'That's the most beautifully stubborn thing I've ever heard. When you're ready to take over the tech industry, I'll be here.' Sounds like a keeper." "He is." Maya's smile widened. "Did I mention he helped me secure funding for my own startup? As an investor, not a boyfriend. Very strict boundaries." "How's that going?" 3 patents filed, 2 major clients signed, and a development team of 12 brilliant women who've all been burned by men like David at some point in their careers. Maya's voice carried a satisfaction that had been absent for years. We're calling it Phoenix Innovations. Perfect name. Maya was about to respond when her phone buzzed with a text from Khalil. Dinner tonight, I have news. She texted back, good news or bad news? Depends on how you feel about marriage proposals. Maya stared at her phone, her heart stopping mid-beat. Dr. Warren, reading over her shoulder, laughed out loud. Well, the older woman said, I'd say that settles the question of whether he's willing to wait. Maya's hands were shaking as she typed, that's not funny. Khalil's response came immediately. Who said I was joking? Dinner at 8? Maya excused herself from Dr. Warren and called Khalil directly. He answered on the first ring. Please tell me you're not actually planning to propose tonight, Maya said without preamble. I'm actually planning to propose right now, Khalil replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Over the phone seems less romantic, but I'm surprisingly nervous about waiting until dinner. Khalil. Maya Chen, you are the most brilliant, stubborn, incredible woman I've ever known. You've rebuilt your entire life from nothing, created a company that's already changing the industry, and somehow managed to fall in love with a workaholic billionaire who didn't know what happiness was until he met you. Maya felt tears starting to build behind her eyes. You make me want to be better than I am, Khalil continued. You make me laugh, you challenge every assumption I have about the world, and you solve impossible problems before breakfast. I love your sarcasm, your determination, your terrible habit of working until 3 in the morning, and the way you look at me like I'm worth something more than my bank account balance. Khalil, Maya whispered. I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your company or your stubborn refusal to accept help. You don't need. I'm asking you to build something with me that's bigger than either of us could create alone. Maya was crying now, standing in David's former office, surrounded by the ruins of the life he'd tried to build on stolen dreams. So, Khalil said quietly, Maya Chen, will you marry me? You can't propose over the phone, Maya managed through her tears. I can do whatever I want, I'm a billionaire, remember? His tone was teasing, but she could hear the nervous edge underneath. Besides, you still haven't answered the question. Maya wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Ask me again at dinner. Is that a yes? That's a bring a ring and find out. Khalil's laughter was warm and relieved. Challenge accepted. 8 hours later, Maya sat across from Khalil in the same Italian restaurant where they'd had their first real conversation. He'd chosen their original table, and the familiar setting made everything feel like coming full circle. Nervous? Maya asked, noting how Khalil kept checking his watch. Terrified, he admitted. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than this. Good, Maya said with a smile. I'd hate to think I was easy. Easy is the last word I'd use to describe you. Khalil reached across the table and took her hand. Ready for your official proposal? Actually, Maya said, I have something to say first. Khalil's expression grew concerned. That sounds ominous. 6 months ago, I was cleaning your office and believing I was worthless, Maya said quietly. You saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. You didn't just give me money or opportunity. You gave me back my sense of possibility. Maya, I'm not finished. She squeezed his hand. You could have used my desperation to make me dependent on you. Instead, you pushed me to become independent again. You could have made our relationship about gratitude or obligation. Instead, you made it about choice. Maya stood up from her chair and moved around the table, pulling something from her purse as she went. So, before you propose to me, she said, dropping to one knee beside Khalil's chair, I'm proposing to you. Khalil's mouth fell open as Maya opened a small velvet box containing a simple platinum band. Khalil al-Rashid, Maya said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. You are infuriating, generous, brilliant, and absolutely terrible at taking no for an answer. You've made me remember who I was before David, and you've helped me become someone even better. She took a breath. You challenge me, you support me, you make me laugh, and you've never once made me feel like I need to be smaller to make room for your ego. I love your ridiculous dramatic gestures, Your terrible habit of throwing money at problems, and the way you look at me like I hung the moon. Maya, Khalil whispered. I'm asking you to build a life with me, Maya continued. Not as my savior or my patron or my business partner, but as my equal, as my best friend, as the person I choose to love for the rest of my life. She held up the ring. So, Khalil al-Rashid, will you marry me? For a moment, Khalil just stared at her. Then he started laughing. Deep, joyful laughter that drew stares from other diners and made Maya's heart sing. Yes, he said, pulling her up from the floor and into his arms. Yes, absolutely. Definitely, yes. As he kissed her, Maya felt the last of her carefully constructed walls finally crumble completely. When they broke apart, Khalil was grinning. Though I should mention, he said, I also brought a ring. Show me, Maya challenged. Khalil pulled out his own small box, revealing a stunning solitaire that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. Maya Chen, he said formally, will you marry me back? That depends, Maya replied with a grin. Are you prepared for a lifetime of me being right about algorithms? I'm prepared for a lifetime of you being right about everything, Khalil said, as long as you're prepared for a lifetime of me pretending to argue about it. Deal, Maya said and kissed him again. Later, as they walked hand in hand through the city that had witnessed both her downfall and her resurrection, Maya reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, she'd been invisible, broken, convinced that her story was over. Now she was engaged to a man who saw her as she truly was, running a company built on her own terms, surrounded by people who valued her mind and her heart. Any regrets? Khalil asked, as if reading her thoughts. Maya considered the question seriously. About David? About the 3 years? About everything that led me to that office building on the night I met you? About any of it? Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. Not a single one, she said firmly. Because every terrible thing that happened led me to you. And this, us, is worth all of it. Even the part where I was an arrogant ass who challenged a janitor to solve impossible algorithms? Especially that part, Maya said with a laugh. Though for the record, I was never really a janitor. No, I was a brilliant woman waiting for the right moment to remind the world who she was. So Maya stood on her tiptoes to kiss him one more time. Thank you for being my moment, Khalil al-Rashid. Thank you for being mine, Maya Chen. As they walked home together, planning a wedding and a future that neither of them could have imagined 6 months earlier, Maya realized that sometimes the best love stories begin with the ending of everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to discover who you were meant to become. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who sees your potential even when you've forgotten it exists. Someone who doesn't save you, but stands beside you while you save yourself. Maya squeezed Khalil's hand and smiled at the city lights ahead of them, ready for whatever impossible challenges tomorrow might bring.